So today's workshop is really just a discussion about mostly deliverables, but the scaffolding and deliverables portion of building your course plan. Let's start talking deliverables. You already have a plan for putting together your course, an idea of what each lesson will cover, and what you want your students to accomplish. And now, as you're building in your assignments or activities, these will be things that will allow you to assess what your students have learned. During this part of the course process, you should be thinking about planning from two perspectives, from the student side and from the instructor side. Now, typically when we're planning assignments, we plan from the instructor's point of view. You're thinking of how you're going to assess your students' learning. But I would ask that you start thinking about all of your assignments from the student's perspective. From their side, your deliverables or assignments are asking them to demonstrate their learning. Now, before you can assess whether they've learned anything or not, they have to be capable of demonstrating that information or that knowledge that they have gained. And this can often conflict with our teaching plan. So here's where we really connect the materials that we're giving students, so our scaffolding portion of our plan, to what we're asking them to do. With each deliverable or assignment, I want you to think about it from the perspective of, have you given them the information that will allow them to be successful in this assessment? How have you given them the skills or the space to critically think about the material in order to demonstrate their learning? A lot of what we do, work that we do, time we spend grading, falls into this twisted pile of throwaway assignments, and that's really unhelpful to the student because they're not engaging with the material in a way that's meaningful. And so as you're building this, that's what I want you to think about. Now, if you have tried and true assignments that you feel good about, this is not the point where I say you have to change them. This is the point where I say, remember, do what works for you. You're building a course that fits your subject, your students, and your style of teaching. If you have a lesson that you struggle with or that your students struggle with, this is the point where I'm giving you full permission to change it or throw it out. And here's some ideas of how to do this. And not work-intensive ways, but smaller ways. In essence, think small. I know that I've already mentioned James Lang's book, Small Teaching, and the study that I'm going to talk to you about is taken from that book. But one of the things that I thought was significant about this idea of small teaching is Lang doesn't call it what I'm going to talk about in your assignments teaching. He calls it small interventions. The basics is that a small idea is something that you can insert into your course without having to redefine the whole method of teaching, connecting materials, or assessing your students' understanding. So the recommendation is not to build big or broad assignments, heavily weighted assignments. Instead, to build moments within your teaching practice that you can capture or sink in what you are covering to your students. This can be very simple. It can be a 5-minute activity, a quick 5-question quiz during a lesson to make sure students are solidifying vocabularies or ideas. It can be a short discussion or anything like that that's short and is not consuming of time inside the classroom, but it's built into the way that you teach in order to assess whether your students are moving forward the way that you would like them to. And here is why. In a study conducted by Rodinger and Butler, where they had students listen to 3 30-minute lectures over a 3-day period on a subject. 30 days later, these same students came back and took a final test on the material. And they did that this way to mirror the gap between information consumption, like we typically share in a classroom, versus final assessments that you would get at the end of a course. The students were broken into 4 groups who performed the following activities after each lecture. So one group took a short answer test on that day's lecture. Another took a multiple choice quiz on the lecture. A third restudied the key points from the lecture. And a fourth left directly after the class. In their results, Rodinger and Butler found that the first group scored the highest on the final test. The second and third groups scored about the same and not much lower than the first, and the last group scored significantly lower. Their final assessment from the study was that students retain more information for longer when they are asked to respond to the material covered, and not just respond in an assignment they're turning in later or in a week or two, but respond immediately. This does not have to be lengthy tests, essays, or large assignments. It is just a matter of connecting each new lesson with a way for students to demonstrate that they have learned something. And this is what James Lang calls the daily intervention to refine the learning process. It should be simple. For example, beginning each class by asking students to tell you what the key points of the last class were. Taking daily quizzes, closing each class by asking students to create quiz questions from that day's lesson. By asking students to create quiz questions from that day's lesson or write down important principles. Putting students into the practice of extrapolating value and connecting with the material to future learning outcomes is what these small interventions are doing. The key is to do them frequently and regularly. Instead of letting students swirl in between all the information and try to connect the dots, we're making opportunities to connect them regularly. And it is that value that is the most important to us as instructors. We want to keep them engaged, but we want them to learn something of value in their lives. If you're used to giving unit or chapter assessments, make sure to include a few questions that ask students to connect with material from the previous unit or chapter. Again, you're drawing lines and helping build this network of learning. You want to create these lines where they are drawing on their previously learned information, not moving past it to the next piece. These are small ideas, but ultimately are building those levels of learning, building those vocabularies that are necessary for student success. So we want to challenge you in this part of your planning to think about your deliverables not in just big, broad strokes, but also small. The next concept I want you to think about is the difference between declarative knowledge and critical thinking or problem-solving knowledge. As you're building your plan, look at your deliverables and how many of them are declarative. Are you asking students to memorize and report back information or integrate and apply it? This is a challenge. Instructors want students to use critical thinking or to apply their instruction to real-world ideas and situations, yet it is rare that assignments ask the latter of students. As you're building your assignments, or even as you're teaching your newly designed course, consider both forms. Declarative knowledge is ideal for building vocabularies, checking for understanding, and routines in learning practices. So that's where you get the small daily or weekly checks. Assignments that require reflection, application, critical thinking, and problem solving are also necessary for students to demonstrate their knowledge. The point I hope you take away from this is that there isn't a style that is the correct one. Both should be incorporated. Unfortunately, most planning, the critical thinking portion comes at the end of the course, and it has not been built throughout, which is why students' ending grade is often a challenge. So if you're incorporating both, look at how you've already planned your deliverables. If you lean towards one particular style, try incorporating the other once or twice into your course. And look at your scaffolding and see if there are lessons that fit better with one type or another. This is really, as you're filling out that deliverables portion of your course, this is really the key time to say, here's what materials in the scaffolding portion that I have created or I'm giving to my students, and are those materials sufficient for them to successfully complete the deliverables? And if not, is there more I should add? Or is there different information I should add? Or should I take out some and focus more heavily on a particular aspect? And that's really kind of what I wanted to go over briefly with you about the scaffolding and deliverables part of this course plan. So as always, if you have questions, please ask them. And I will post some more information on disposable assignments for further reading for those of you who enjoy that.